Sarah Brennan became a widow at 27 when her husband Thomas died of pneumonia in March 1881, leaving her with a 2-year-old daughter, a barely functional cabin in Idaho Territory, and a heating system so inefficient it had probably contributed to Thomas's death. The cabin was typical frontier construction, 16 by 20 feet, single-layer plank walls, a cast-iron stove in the center that consumed wood voraciously while barely keeping the space above freezing during Idaho winters that regularly hit -30 degrees. Thomas had spent half his time cutting wood, the other half burning it, and they'd still been cold, dangerously cold, the kind of cold that weakened immune systems and turned pneumonia into a death sentence. Sarah had watched her husband die slowly over 2 weeks, coughing in a cabin that stayed at 45 degrees, despite the stove burning continuously. Had watched their daughter Emma develop the same cough, the same fever, and had felt absolutely helpless to warm the space enough to help them heal. Thomas died. Emma survived. Sarah decided that no one else in her family would die from inadequate heating, but she couldn't afford to rebuild the cabin. Couldn't afford better insulation or a larger stove. Thomas's death had left her with minimal savings and a homestead claim she could barely maintain alone. The community expected her to remarry quickly or give up the claim and move back east to family. She refused both options. She'd stay, she'd survive, she'd figure out how to heat her cabin efficiently with the resources she had. The idea came from an unexpected source. An article in a 6-month-old Scientific American magazine she found in the general store, used as wrapping paper. An article about thermal mass storage, about how certain materials could absorb tremendous heat and release it slowly over time. About experiments with underground heat storage using stone and earth as thermal batteries. Sarah read that article 5 times, understanding more with each reading. Heat didn't have to escape immediately up a chimney. Heat could be captured, stored, released gradually. If she could route her stove's exhaust through significant thermal mass before it escaped to atmosphere, she could capture heat that conventional chimneys wasted. She conceived something nobody had attempted: a buried chimney. Instead of routing smoke directly upward and out, she'd route it downward first, through channels beneath her cabin floor, through tons of stone and earth that would absorb the heat. Then, after traveling through maybe 30 feet of underground thermal mass, the smoke would finally exhaust through a chimney positioned away from the cabin. Every time she burned wood, the underground stone would get hotter. That heat would radiate upward through her floor continuously, long after the fire went out. She'd essentially be building a giant thermal battery beneath her cabin, charged by her stove's waste heat. She took the idea to James Cartwright, the town's most respected builder and the man everyone consulted for construction advice. He listened to her explanation, looked at her sketches and laughed. Not cruel laughter, but the dismissive laughter of someone hearing something obviously impossible. "Mrs. Brennan, smoke goes up. That's how chimneys work. Hot air rises. You can't make smoke go down into the ground before going up. It defies basic physics. Smoke goes wherever the draft pulls it. If I create proper draft with the exit chimney positioned higher than the entry point, the smoke will follow the path I create, even if that path goes down first." "But why would you want smoke going through your foundation? You'd fill your cabin with smoke. You'd create a fire hazard. This is dangerous. The channels would be sealed. No smoke would enter the living space. The heat would transfer through stone to the floor. It's thermal mass storage using waste heat from combustion." Cartwright set down her sketches with the patient condescension men showed widows with impractical ideas. "Mrs. Brennan, I understand you're trying to solve a problem, trying to stay warm with limited resources. But this won't work. Build a conventional chimney, insulate better, use proven methods." She tried 3 other builders, all refused to help, All said the same things. Smoke goes up, not down. Buried chimneys don't work. Widows shouldn't attempt experimental construction. Use conventional methods and hope for better results. Sarah decided to build it herself. She had no construction experience beyond helping Thomas with basic repairs. But she had the Scientific American article, she had determination, and she had the certain knowledge that another winter with conventional heating would kill either her or Emma. She started in May, working during Emma's nap times and after bedtime, making progress in stolen hours while maintaining the homestead and caring for a toddler alone. The work had to happen in fragments. An hour here, 30 minutes there. Whatever time she could steal from the relentless demands of frontier survival as a widow with a small child. First, she needed to excavate beneath and beside her cabin to create the path her buried chimney would follow. This wasn't simple digging. This was engineering excavation that had to maintain structural integrity, had to follow precise paths, had to create exact dimensions for the thermal mass system to function. The cabin sat on a stone foundation that created about 18 inches of clearance beneath the floor. Enough space to crawl under for repairs, but nowhere near enough space to build the thermal mass channel she needed. She required at least 3 feet of depth beneath the cabin floor to accommodate the stone-lined passages and surrounding thermal mass material. She started digging the exterior trench on the first Saturday of May, working in the early morning before Emma woke. The trench would run from a point beneath her cabin stove location to a spot 20 feet away where the exit chimney would eventually be built. This trench needed to be 3 feet wide to accommodate the stone channel she'd construct, 3 feet deep to provide adequate thermal mass volume, 30 feet long following the path from stove to exit point. The mathematics were daunting. 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep, 30 feet long. That was 270 cubic feet of earth. Soil weighs approximately 70 pounds per cubic foot. She was going to move nearly 19,000 pounds of dirt, by hand, with a shovel and bucket, while caring for a toddler. Progress was agonizingly slow. The first morning, working for 90 minutes before Emma woke, Sarah removed maybe 3 cubic feet of earth, 6 buckets, 180 pounds of dirt. At that rate, she'd need 90 mornings of work just for the exterior portion of the trench. 3 months of dawn excavation before even touching the harder work beneath the cabin. But she'd learned something important during those first 90 minutes. She couldn't just remove dirt randomly. She had to maintain precise dimensions, had to keep the trench walls vertical, had to ensure the bottom was level, had to work carefully or she'd create a mess that couldn't support the stone construction she planned. The neighbors noticed within a week. How could they not? A growing pile of excavated earth beside the widow's cabin, a long trench taking shape. A young woman doing heavy manual labor typically reserved for men. Questions began immediately. Margaret Harrison, wife of the town's wealthiest rancher, organized what she called a welfare visit, but was actually an intervention. Brought 4 women to Sarah's cabin on a Saturday morning to express concerns. "Sarah, dear, people are worried. You're digging trenches around your cabin like you're building fortifications. It's strange behavior, concerning behavior. The kind of thing that makes people question your stability. I'm building a heating system, an efficient heating system that will keep Emma and me warm this winter. By digging holes. Sarah, that's not how heating works. You need to accept help. Accept that you can't maintain this homestead alone. Martin Henderson has expressed interest in courting you. He's a good man with resources. You should consider... I'm not remarrying to solve a heating problem I can solve myself with engineering." "Engineering? You're a widow with a toddler, not an engineer. This digging, this project, it's evidence that you're not coping well with Thomas's death. We're concerned about Emma's welfare, about whether you're capable of providing proper care." The threat was clear. If Sarah continued behaving strangely, if she continued refusing male help, if she continued attempting construction projects widows shouldn't attempt, the community might decide Emma needed to be placed with a more stable family. Sarah kept digging. By July, the exterior trench was complete. Now came the harder part. She needed to dig beneath her cabin floor, connecting the exterior trench to her stove location. This meant crawling into the 18-inch foundation space with a shovel and lantern, digging in cramped darkness, removing dirt backwards through a space barely large enough for her body. She'd work until her back screamed from hunching, until her hands bled despite gloves, until dirt filled her hair and mouth and eyes. Then she'd crawl out, wash as best she could with limited water, and care for Emma like nothing was wrong. By August, the complete trench was excavated. 30 feet of pathway, 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep, running from beneath her cabin stove location to a point 20 feet from the cabin where she'd build the exit chimney. Next came the thermal mass construction. She needed to line this trench with stone, creating sealed channels that would contain the smoke while transferring heat to surrounding earth. She collected flat river stones, hundreds of them, hauled them in her small cart, and began building the channel walls. The construction was meticulous, bottom layer of flat stones, mortared together, side walls of stacked stone, also mortared, creating a passage about 12 inches square. Top layer of slate she'd found in a creek bed 3 miles away, creating a sealed roof, the entire channel sealed so no smoke could escape into the earth. But here was the innovation. She didn't just build a simple straight channel, she built the channel in a serpentine pattern beneath her cabin floor, maximizing contact between hot smoke and stone thermal mass. The smoke would enter from her stove, travel downward through an initial drop, then wind back and forth beneath her floor in a snake pattern, then finally exit upward through the distant chimney. Every foot of that journey, hot smoke would transfer heat to stone. The stone would transfer heat to the surrounding earth. The earth beneath her floor would become a massive heat sink, storing warmth and radiating it upward for hours after each fire ended. By September, the buried channel was complete. She'd built stone-lined passages beneath and around her cabin floor, filled the surrounding space with additional rock for thermal mass, then covered everything with the excavated earth. From outside, nothing looked different except the soil was slightly raised. Inside, her floor was now positioned above several tons of stone and earth that would function as a thermal battery. The final step was modifying her stove connection and building the exit chimney. She disconnected the conventional chimney from her stove, created a new connection that routed exhaust downward into her buried channel system. 20 feet away, she built a conventional stone chimney, rising 8 feet above ground level, connected to the exit point of her underground system. The design looked insane. Smoke would exit her stove, travel down through the floor, snake beneath the cabin through sealed stone channels, travel underground for 30 feet, then finally exhaust through a distant chimney. Every conventional builder said it wouldn't work, said the draft would fail, said she'd fill her cabin with smoke. Sarah sealed all the joints carefully, tested the channels for leaks, and prepared for her first fire. The test came on October 1st. She built a small fire in her stove. Smoke began rising, and she held her breath, waiting to see if it would draft correctly down through her buried system or back up into her living space. The smoke hesitated at the stove opening, seemed to pool. Then, slowly, it began flowing downward into the buried channel entrance. She heard it moving through the stone passages beneath her floor, a soft, rushing sound. 30 seconds later, smoke emerged from the distant chimney, steady and strong. The draft worked. The system worked. Smoke was flowing exactly as she'd designed, down and through thermal mass before exhausting to atmosphere. She let the fire burn for 2 hours, feeding it regularly, building heat. The stove functioned normally. No smoke entered the cabin. Everything exhausted cleanly through the buried system. After 2 hours, she let the fire die out completely. No coals remaining. Stove cold. In the conventional system, the cabin would begin cooling immediately, would be cold within an hour or two. Sarah waited. Within 30 minutes, her floor began warming noticeably. The stone thermal mass beneath was releasing stored heat. The warmth spread across the floor, radiating upward. An hour after the fire ended, the cabin was warmer than it had been with the fire burning. The effect lasted. 6 hours after the fire died, the floor was still warm. The cabin maintained comfortable temperature with no active heating. The underground thermal mass was slowly releasing the heat it had absorbed, exactly as she'd calculated it would. She'd created a system that captured waste heat, stored it in thermal mass, and released it gradually over many hours. She was heating her cabin with energy that conventional chimneys wasted to atmosphere. October brought mild testing, cool nights, nothing serious. Sarah's buried chimney system kept the cabin comfortable with minimal wood consumption. Morning fire, evening fire. Each burn charged the thermal battery beneath her floor. The heat lasted between burns. November brought the first real cold, temperature dropping to 10 degrees. Sarah's neighbors were burning wood constantly, feeding stoves continuously, struggling to maintain 50 degrees inside. Sarah burned wood twice daily for 2 hours each time. Her thermal mass system maintained 60 degrees continuously. Emma stopped coughing. The sustained, comfortable warmth was better for her health than the fluctuating temperatures of conventional heating. The floor warmth meant she could play comfortably without being bundled in layers. Sarah noticed the difference immediately. Her daughter was healthier, happier, more active. But the community noticed too. Noticed Sarah wasn't consuming wood at the rate everyone else was. Noticed her chimney was positioned away from her cabin. Noticed smoke seemed to go underground before exhausting. The mockery intensified. The widow had built something insane. The buried chimney was a fire hazard waiting to happen. It probably didn't work at all, and Sarah was freezing but too proud to admit failure. Then December came, and with it came the blizzard that would define the winter of 1881 in Idaho Territory memory. Old-timers would reference it for decades. The December freeze, the storm of 81, the blizzard that separated prepared from unprepared with lethal efficiency. The storm arrived December 8th, with virtually no warning. Frontier weather forecasting consisted of watching clouds, feeling pressure changes, observing animal behavior. The signs had been there for those experienced enough to read them, but most people missed the warnings or dismissed them as normal winter approach. Morning of December 8th started unseasonably warm. 30 degrees at dawn, almost pleasant for early winter. People went about normal activities. Children played outside. Men worked on outdoor projects. Women hung laundry that would actually dry in the mild temperature. It felt like a gift from nature before winter set in, seriously. By noon, the temperature had dropped to 10 degrees, a 20-degree fall in 6 hours. That should have been the final warning, but most people assumed it was just typical mountain weather volatility. By evening, the temperature hit minus 10 degrees. By midnight, minus 25. The fall was so rapid that water froze in buckets indoors, that livestock caught in fields began dying from exposure, that inadequate preparation revealed itself immediately. And it kept dropping, minus 30 by 2 a.m., minus 35 by dawn on December 9th. This wasn't normal cold. This was life-threatening cold that killed exposed skin in minutes, that overwhelmed heating systems designed for typical winters, that made survival the only priority. The snow started around midnight on December 8th, not gentle flakes, suggesting accumulation over days. Heavy, dense snow falling so thick it created immediate whiteout conditions. Visibility dropped to nothing within an hour. Wind built from 15 miles per hour to 30, then 40, then sustained at 50 miles per hour for the next 72 hours straight. The combination of -35 degrees and 50-mile-per-hour wind created effective temperatures approaching -70 degrees. Exposed skin froze almost instantly. Breathing unprotected air damaged lungs. Walking outside meant risking death within minutes if you couldn't find shelter immediately. This was killing weather, the kind that defined frontier survival. Every winter, storms like this revealed who'd prepared adequately and who'd just hoped for mild conditions. This year's storm was testing everyone simultaneously, and most people were failing the test catastrophically. Sarah's neighbors were in immediate crisis from the first hours of serious cold. Wood supplies that should have lasted until February were depleting at alarming rates. Houses that seemed adequately prepared couldn't maintain temperature despite continuous burning. Families were making desperate decisions about survival strategies that all involved suffering. The Peterson family's cabin dropped to 30 degrees inside despite burning wood continuously from the moment the temperature started falling. Mr. Peterson was feeding the stove every 30 minutes, consuming wood faster than he'd ever imagined possible, and still watching interior temperature fall steadily. By the second day of the blizzard, the children were developing frostbite on their toes and fingers while sleeping under piles of blankets in the coldest bedroom. They'd abandoned trying to heat the whole cabin, crowded into the main room near the stove, sacrificing the rest of their home to freezing temperatures. On day 3, Mr. Peterson was burning furniture, chairs first, then a small table, then bed frames from the abandoned bedroom. Burning anything that would produce heat because the alternative was watching his children freeze. The Morrison house, larger and supposedly better built with actual insulation in the walls, couldn't maintain 45 degrees despite having 2 stoves burning simultaneously. Mrs. Morrison had been sick with fever since before the blizzard hit, needing warmth to recover. But the house couldn't provide adequate heat, no matter how much fuel the family consumed. Mr. Morrison was facing the terrible calculation of whether to risk the journey to town through the blizzard to seek help, knowing the trip would likely kill him, but staying meant watching his wife deteriorate in sustained cold. Every family in Silver Creek was suffering variations of the same crisis. Inadequate heat despite maximum effort, depleting fuel supplies, sustained cold that was weakening everyone, especially children and the elderly. Decisions about which rooms to abandon, which furniture to burn, how to survive until the storm broke. Sarah's cabin, heated by her buried thermal mass system that everyone had mocked for months, maintained 58 to 62 degrees throughout the entire blizzard. She fired her stove 3 times daily instead of her normal twice, compensating for the extreme cold outside. Each 2-hour burn charged her underground thermal battery with captured waste heat. The massive stone and earth thermal mass beneath her floor, the tons of rock she'd carefully positioned and mortared, absorbed heat during each burn and released it steadily for 8 to 10 hours afterward. The system that James Cartwright had said violated basic physics was outperforming every conventional heating system in town by dramatic margin. Emma played on the warm floor in light clothing, completely comfortable, never developing the illness that plagued other children. Sarah cooked meals, cared for her daughter, and used maybe 1 cord of wood during 4 days of conditions that were consuming entire winter supplies for her neighbors. On day 3 of the blizzard, James Cartwright came to Sarah's door, desperate. His family was out of wood. His children were showing signs of hypothermia. He needed help, and Sarah's cabin was the closest structure. She opened the door, and warm air rolled out into -35-degree wind. Cartwright, his wife, and their 3 children stumbled inside from cold that had nearly killed them walking the 100 yards from their cabin. They stood in Sarah's warm cabin, feeling heat radiating from the floor beneath their feet, seeing no conventional fire burning, and couldn't comprehend what they were experiencing. "Your cabin is warm," Cartwright said. voice hoarse from cold exposure. Actually warm, warmer than my house with a fire burning continuously. How is this possible? The buried chimney system you said wouldn't work. It works. It stores heat in thermal mass beneath the floor. I'm heating with energy conventional chimneys waste. The Cartwright family stayed for 6 hours, warming thoroughly, eating hot food Sarah prepared, recovering from sustained cold exposure that had been killing them. When they left, Cartwright looked at Sarah with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of physics had just been rewritten. You were right. Completely right. I was wrong. I'm sorry I refused to help you build this. The blizzard ended December 12th. When people could travel again, they came to understand how Sarah's cabin had stayed warm while theirs had nearly killed them. She showed them the buried channel system, explained thermal mass storage, demonstrated how captured waste heat could provide sustained warming. Within 2 weeks, 5 families had asked Sarah to help design similar systems. By spring, 3 were under construction. The buried chimney concept, mocked for months, became the most sought-after heating innovation in Silver Creek. The community's attitude towards Sarah changed completely. The widow they'd thought was unstable was actually the only person who'd properly understood heating efficiency. The buried chimney they'd mocked had saved lives during the blizzard that had nearly killed unprepared families. Martin Henderson, who'd expressed interest in courting Sarah, came to apologize. I thought you needed a man to solve your problems. Turns out you needed men to stop preventing you from solving problems yourself. Sarah never remarried. Raised Emma alone on the homestead Thomas had died trying to maintain. Built a reputation as a heating system consultant, helping families across the territory design efficient systems. Made more money from her engineering knowledge than Thomas had made from farming. Emma grew up in the warmest cabin in Idaho Territory, never developing the respiratory issues that plagued other frontier children. She became a teacher, then a school administrator, then a territorial education official. She credited her success to growing up with a mother who taught her that being told something is impossible just means nobody has figured out how to do it yet. The original cabin still exists, maintained by the Idaho Historical Society. Modern thermal analysis confirms what Sarah proved in 1881. Buried thermal mass storage using waste heat from conventional combustion is remarkably efficient. The system she built could store approximately 200,000 BTUs of thermal energy, releasing it slowly over 12 to 24 hours. The historical marker reads, Sarah Brennan, 1854 to 1922, widow and engineer who designed buried thermal mass chimney system in 1881. Proved that waste heat capture and storage is superior to conventional direct heating. Design influenced residential heating systems across Idaho Territory. But the real story is simpler and more powerful. A 27-year-old widow, told by every expert that her idea was impossible, built it anyway because keeping her daughter alive mattered more than respecting conventional wisdom. She proved that smoke can go down before going up if you design the system correctly. That thermal mass storage works regardless of whether people understand the physics. That the person everyone is mocking might be the only one actually solving the problem. And sometimes, burying your chimney beneath your cabin instead of extending it above your roof is exactly the right answer to a question everyone else is asking wrong. Sarah died in 1922 at age 68. Emma spoke at her funeral, telling the assembled mourners, "My mother was told that what she was building couldn't work, that physics wouldn't allow it, that widows didn't do engineering. She built it anyway. She kept me alive. She kept us warm. She proved that being right is more important than being conventional. That's the greatest inheritance a mother can give a daughter." The cabin still stands. The buried chimney still exists beneath it. And every winter, When snow falls in Idaho Territory, people tell the story of the widow who built a chimney underground and saved her daughter's life by refusing to accept that impossible means impossible.